Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon from wherever you may be joining us. Good evening. I find myself this morning in SoCal, Southern California, and I have joined the show a couple of times from Europe. My travels caught me there during an Action Items live show, and the Friday evening, late afternoon group is always great. And I always mentioned that I really appreciate you for joining on the Friday afternoon instead of going and leaving the office or going to do whatever you're going to be doing. But I must say, there are a couple of people that I see very often joining from the West Coast and getting up at 6 in the morning to watch the show at 7 in the morning is definitely taking the cake, because I have been up at 6 to host at 7, and I do not ever want to do this again. It's way too early. So why are you guys getting up? But if you are, love it. Thank you so much for joining. We are back this year, 2023. It is the first episode of the year, and I am so excited. We've got some great guests lined up for the rest of the year, at least so far booked through June or July, I believe. And I just cannot wait to share everyone's diverse experience and tips and tricks for supply chain management and production planning and implementing those technologies and software. So we are back with our first episode with Derek from Pop Capacity. We had an episode last year with Matt Fain from Pop Capacity, also co-founder, and we talked about peak season. Well, now peak season is over. We promised that we would come back and kind of talk about a review of what happened during peak season, and we are now also in return season. So Derek and I are going to be talking a little bit about returns and how you guys can take some action items away to be able to manage those and be thinking about that. So let's bring Derek to the screen, to your virtual homes, wherever you are. Thanks so much for joining, Derek.
Thank you for having me. How are you?
I am at 7 in the morning. Like I think that the sun rise is like 7:09, so I beat the sun. Like that's the thing.
Yeah.
But other than that, I mean, I cannot complain. 2023 has been off to a great start for our team over at NewGenArchitects, who everyone knows sponsors the show, and we support clients with digital software implementations. We've been focusing a lot in the manufacturing space. So things have been great. What about you guys over at Pop Capacity?
Yeah, same thing. I think the last 2 weeks of the year, thankfully, weren't as crazy as the previous year, right? So we got a little bit of breathing room, but it is right back at it. These last, to start January has been absolutely crazy. All the initiatives that got put on hold in Q4 are immediately getting revisited. So we're super busy, but it's exciting. It's going to be a crazy year.
Yeah. So what's going to make it crazy?
Well, I think
Everything.
I think that's certainly like when I talk to merchants and our 3PL warehouses, it's just the uncertainty, right? Like, what's the economy going to do? Is there a recession? If not, it's going to change the type of, like warehouse capacity people are going to tap into. It's not going to stop the need of or the usage of it. It's just the type, right? Is it going to be further growing into fulfillment and some of that, or is it going to be more bulk stock storage? Is there going to be a reduction in a lot of the containers coming in overseas? Because, we had a lot of the inventory come in last year that came in huge quantities that needed a home immediately. So we're curious to see if that's going to continue again this year.
Okay. So for last year, peak season review, we promised that we would come back, and we chatted with Matt Fain is Maine. we chatted with Matt, pre-peak season, and people were saying they kind of, for the most part, felt prepared. And Matt said, "Oh, but it's too early to tell." What did you guys experience?
Yeah, it wasn't as frantic as the year before, right? As you'd expect with COVID. One of the things that was really interesting was it was more leveled out. So it was still super busy. It just didn't have that huge spike that last week of Christmas. So, I went and talked to about 20 of our suppliers in different regions across the country that focus on fulfillment to prepare for this. And it was interesting. It wasn't as frantic. So that last week wasn't quite as busy. One of the things we're kind of wondering is it because we saw a lot more discounting prior to Black Friday and Cyber Monday? So was it the offering of discounts in the month leading up that really leveled out that, or were consumers more savvy this year, anticipating some of the shipping delays that occurred in that last week or two and got ahead of the curve? That's what we're trying to unpack and figure out what drove that to be the case. But it was still, the volumes were incredibly high. It just wasn't that frantic last week.
Yeah, I'm sure the demand planners are going to have their hands full the next couple of weeks trying to sift through that data and figure things out, because your job as a demand planner is to understand what are the different factors that are going to affect consumer behavior and when people are going to be purchasing and things like that. And I know that especially in supply chain, we always talk about AI, and I hear a lot of people talk about this hands-off, fully automated supply chain. And whenever I hear that, I always, very politely disagree. There are some things that you cannot automate. You need, regardless of how great your algorithm is and how great your software is, we're still going to need people to be able to tell the system, oh, this didn't happen as we expected, but me as the human that lived the experience, this is what I think happened and why that happened. So now go change and make some new AI suggestions and recommendations and alerts based off of that. But we're always getting our people. So shout out to the demand planners as you guys are trying to sift through that data and figure out what's going on. So returns, it's peak season happened. People are getting their stuff. They're sending it back. They didn't like that gift. It didn't fit, whatever it is. And I think I remember reading, I should have written it down. I did not, because I planned to pull it up. We talked about the technical difficulties that I was having before that find me on the floor at the hotel. But I don't have the exact numbers pulled up. Shout out to our friends over at Porter Logic and Jonathan Porter, who did his analysis of this. But I think the number was maybe up to 17% from 16.5% last year of UPS, expecting returns, or what they were preparing for. So needless to say, very long way of saying returns are up. Returns are up. So there's also been a lot of talk in supply chain about like returnable packaging and the sustainability around that. And I don't think that everyone has a really good, robust plan or idea around how to handle returns and what that looks like. So I think that it's easy to say, maybe mitigate the returns, make sure they don't happen. but there's always going to be some part of, someone's going to send something back for one reason or another, or something's not going to work. You can't catch every single, just from a quality perspective, you can't catch every single thing. Something will break, a piece or a part, or something like that. So how can people start to be better prepared for reverse logistics and returns?
It's a really good question. And it is something that can no longer be ignored, right? There's been year over year growth in returns. So that's something that's continuing to grow. It's kind of like when you think about WMSs becoming such a key component of a warehouse about 10, 15 years ago, a real robust return management program is going to be absolutely necessary within the next 5 years. So if you're a warehouse that's going to be conducting any sort of fulfillment, distribution from that kind of standpoint, you're going to want to offer your merchants the ability to process and handle returns. That Porter Logic story that you had shared was super interesting, right? It's like, get started, at least get an Excel spreadsheet going, get a trackable process. I think if I'm a merchant, I want visibility. So I need to know exactly which items are being returned, why they're being returned, why they're being rejected, whether rather than going back in stock and going into that donation bucket, or whether they're going to the dumpster. You want to know why. And I think so having visibility into the returns beyond just being able to process it is going to be huge, right? So you're a merchant and you have the same SKU that constantly is getting returned with the same issue, it might not be, just abuse by the customer. It actually might be a supply issue in manufacturing. Like there was an example about these boots that I was talking to a customer about, that they found out through the returns policy that the leather was actually warping in the shipping. And so that was a supplier issue that got identified by having a robust returns policy. So, something we do at Pop is we're always kind of looking for new best in breed technologies that we can help our 3PL warehouses implement to better their service offerings. There's companies out there doing this, like 2Boxes, right? They can go in and set up a real robust return program for a 3PL warehouse and merchant to give them visibility, even down to the level where you can see a picture of every individual damaged item, the amount of time it took to process that return, where it exactly sits, if it got deemed that it was, okay to go back into stock, then immediately hits that quantity, right? So that can be purchased again on your site, how long that process takes. So I think visibility, kind of like what you were talking about, having the data in front of you so you can make actionable decisions. Returns is something we need to start thinking about in that same regard.
There's so many ideas that I have in my mind, and I was thinking, I'm not going to interrupt. I'm going to say it once he's done speaking. And then I was thinking, oh, I should be writing all this down because I'm not going to remember all of it. But one of there are two things that do stand out that I do remember. So the first thing is that it's very interesting for me that you or a point to note for the audience that you said doing this led us to see something way upstream from the supplier. So then I'm thinking, okay, the next step would then be to implement, if I have not already, some sort of quality check when we get, our product in. And there are different ways that you can do. There are some textbook methods that you learn when you're studying, in school that are, you take a certain percentage and you randomly check. And if a certain percentage of what you check is damaged, then you send it back to the supplier, or you write it off and, but you catch it before you even send it out. So again, thinking about mitigating the risk of that return. And taking that data that you mentioned is very important because that can even go back to mitigating the risk, because figuring out why someone is returning something is it can go back to quality, it can go back to operations, it can go back to maybe we just purchased the wrong thing. Like as maybe our buyers purchased the wrong thing and our customer doesn't actually want this. So let's not keep purchasing this again in various colors. Or maybe there's too much selection. We're offering 15 colors and people are buying 4 and then realizing, oh, this is the one that I wanted. You know what I mean? You can reduce that by not offering as much selection. And there are some human behavior studies that have proven and shown when we have too much option, we also make poor decisions. and you can, start to mitigate returns that way. The other thing that stood out to me was just the domino effect. And I always talk about how so much of supply chain is connected. We have to start planning and executing in these logistics silos and manufacturing silos and transportation silos, because everything is so connected. But this domino effect of, okay, thanks to the visibility in this data, there's so much more that I now have to do. And that can seem overwhelming. That can seem like, oh my goodness, I have to do a complete overhaul of everything, which may be true. So I'm not saying that, okay, it's not that hard. No, it really could be true, but you don't have to boil the ocean. You don't have to tackle everything at the same time. And then you can lean on some of those partners that you mentioned that have that core competency. So don't try to go outside of your realm and do stuff that you don't do. If you do this thing really, really well, it's the basics of economics. You trade. If I do this thing really well and you do that thing really well, I'm gonna do this thing for you, do this thing for me. So do it that way. And we're 15 minutes in. So I I have the last couple of episodes forgotten to share the action items. So let's go ahead and share the first action item, Nicole. So identify and document the requirements, which is great. That goes back to what you were talking about, Derek, of understanding the what you actually need to have in a returns process. Yeah. So I wonder how much of that is the brand or the merchant internally figuring out what the requirements for a good return process would be, yeah, versus leaning on an expert and asking the partner, if you are going to be handling this, what do you need from us? Or is that a partnership? Who leads that conversation?
That's a great question. I think the larger organizations should probably think about, and there was a Wall Street Journal article, I think it was this week, talking about that, like having an executive assigned for end-to-end return policy, right? So they can really map that out. To throw this onto someone else's lap who's also in charge of procuring warehouse space and, you know, trucking and things of that nature would be just far too much. So I think if you're a larger brand, having an executive that oversees this and really mapping out what that end-to-end policy is for you is going to be hugely advantageous. Just coming up with a couple of bullet points, right? Like printable labels for your customers, right? Give them the ability to print the label, come up with that returns process. And I think a lot of this comes in to finding the right, make sure you are with the right warehouse partner. That's the biggest thing that, you know, that we focus on, right? Is put the right merchant in the right warehouse. If returns is a large part of your business, let's make sure that you are aligned with a warehouse that either has the infrastructure already built out or has the capability to do so, right? So if you were going to be sourcing for a fulfillment-based warehouse, you would ask them, what are your throughput volumes and capabilities there? How do you achieve that? Similarly, on the return side, what do you anticipate, you know, starting from day one that we do here? And you'll get a good answer of their capabilities, right? Do they have a well thought out program for that? Or is it something that you're going to come up with together? The good thing is we have plenty of time before this next peak season comes. So no one needs to freak out at this point in time. You have a whole year to build this thing out. And it's just really come to figure out what the end of that looks like. Like you had said, a lot of data is overwhelming. Figure out what the key points of data are. Is it top of mind that you want to know how long it takes an individual to process each one of these returned items? So that in turn, the 3PL knows about how many people they need to have at these peak season for peak returns in order to process those and get those back into stock as soon as possible. Or, you know, are you more interested in something else? So identifying what the key components are and then making sure that you have the ability to have visibility into that data specifically, because too much data is tough. You want a small amount of actionable data from that.
Yeah, we definitely don't want data overload. The other thing that I just thought about when you were talking about requirements and how you talk to merchants when you're matching them with a warehouse, yeah, how vastly different or surprisingly similar is it if you're working with a manufacturer or a merchant or a retailer that is doing small parcel returns versus larger returns? And I asked that because it just got me to thinking about my individual experiences as a consumer. You know, I get stuff from Amazon. Comes in an envelope. I can take it over to the UPS store. But if I get something from, I've had purchases from Bed Bath & Beyond. I've had purchases from Wayfair, and it was the wrong item, or it was, you know, it was completely destroyed upon arrival. So these are, on the first hand, data points that you want to start getting, because I remember getting the same incorrect item multiple times before Wayfair emailed me and said, we're just wait so we can figure out what's going on. We're not going to keep sending you this. But in the end, they told me, well, you just keep it. But that's not necessarily convenient for me. I didn't want this item. And it's like, it's a big patio table. So I don't want 3 patio tables. I want 3 patio chairs. So, you know, having to figure that out, like that's not a drop off at the UPS store. That's a huge item. Yeah. So is is it surprisingly similar process, or is it really different to where, you know, anyone that we have on the audience that is shipping larger items need to consider?
Yeah, no, that's a great question because we do happen to work with some really big, large, bulky items, you know, like beds, things of that nature that you're not going to throw in the back of your car and take it back. One of the things that we've seen work really well is one of two things: having like a home delivery team in every region, right? So where your major sales are, having box trucks, sprinter vans, whatever that can accommodate the size of your goods that can come and pick those items up, or leveraging a 3PL that does have assets. One of the cool things about these 3PLs is they typically do have assets. So you could work up a program where maybe on like a daily basis, they hit specific zip codes for returns and pickups on large bulky items. I don't think the same expectation exists. Like a small parcel, like, yeah, you come pick that up today. If it's large patio furniture, I think you'd be okay if that's a day or two away, right?
Right.
So just having a well thought out process for your particular goods on how you want to achieve that. I mean, we think about today, like what Prime, Amazon announced that they're going to be offering Prime services to non-Amazon sold goods. And Walmart and Salesforce are matching up to do a similar type of offering. So I think when it comes to the returns, it's going to be similar. Print labels, give you multiple spots to drop off for the small parcel stuff, correct? DoorDash is even entering this space, right? They're going to be charging, was it $5?
Oh, I did see that. I did see that.
Like $5 for up to 4 boxes. You know, for people that, you know, it's gonna be a certain segment of the population that's okay paying that premium. Not everyone for sure. So there's different solutions that are out there. If I was a smaller brand, I would want to make sure I'm working with my 3PL and working with them very closely so I can understand their capabilities. Like I said, they have assets, and so they could be the least expensive and most efficient way to pick up some of these returned items.
It's one of the other things that I was thinking about now that you're starting to talk about the 3PL and maybe a delivery partner that can pick up and drop off. That we're now even further outside of the four walls of the business. Yeah. So when we're talking about the requirements and you know, what are the decision points? What would be an accepted return? What would the volume of returns be? You know, getting that data. And I've done a couple of project implementations for retailers where they put their demand planners had percentage of returns. We know that if we purchase this volume of items, that this percentage is going to be returned. So already working that data in, and that's something that you can share with your 3PL partner or with your delivery partner. So we also have to start to think about these requirements gathering and then documenting the process, which I believe is the second action item, or defining and documenting the process, and remembering that some of that is going to be outside of the four walls. So you can't just think about your team. You have to be thinking about what do we have the capacity to do, and what can we do versus what should we do. So again, that core competency. Nicole, is that the second action item? Yes, define a standard repeatable process. Yes, so that's definitely what you want to be thinking about. Okay, if this happens, then this is the result almost all the time. Like, this is what's going to happen. One person isn't going to do it this way, and then another person is going to do it this way, and then another person is going to do it this way. And if you talk to 3 people, you get 5 different answers because it depends on the time of day and, you know, things like that. You want to make sure that you have a standard repeatable process based off of those requirements that you gathered, so that you can start to figure out, which I think the third action item is, who the right partner is. And you talked about, you mentioned that, but I really want to spend a lot of time, or as much time as we have, you know, that makes sense, to talk about the different partner capabilities. Because before the show, we were talking about how there are some 3PLs that focus just on reverse logistics. Mm-hmm. And in my mind, I think that would be if I'm a smaller brand, or even if I'm a larger brand, I'm an executive, as you mentioned, and I'm owning this reverse logistics process. It seems like a lot to say, okay, I've got one 3PL that is going to send the stuff out, and I've got another 3PL that's going to process it when it comes back in. Then if I got bulky items, I've got a local delivery partner. I've got a lot of different pieces moving. Is that the best way if we're talking about core competencies, or are you starting to see that there are, because you mentioned working with some of your 3PL partners so that they're able to automate and bring that technology in? Are you seeing that there are more companies that are trying to provide that full service?
In terms of the company, talking about the merchant themselves or the 3PL?
Oh, no, the 3PL.
Yeah, no, I definitely, the 3PL facilities are starting to add more service offerings to be that whole robust service. Absolutely. Particularly for that area or region that they're servicing. And I've seen, I mean, large brands are leveraging multiple different 3PLs across the country with redundancy in what they're doing for one another. But large organizations typically have a very robust WMS, right? Like an SAP or Oracle. So they can API connect that to various different 3PLs and not have any disruption to the flow of the goods or anything like that, and still have all that, the visibility that they need to know where their SKUs are, you know, down to the SKU level, where it's sitting in each rack. That's uber important for this entire thing to work, correct? If you're going to be managing multiple different things. So from a 3PL standpoint, that's where I had mentioned before, like 2 boxes or open dock, you know, when it comes to dock scheduling, making sure that these things are running as efficiently as possible with the best in breed that's out there in order to be able to accomplish these things. Because it's one thing to say that you can do it. It's another thing to be able to come through for your merchant. So if I'm a 3PL or merchant, I want direct contact with one another for starters. They have to be working with each other. There's no reason that, you know, if you're sitting there, you work for Nike, right, that you're calling me to find out about a warehouse in LA. You need to be talking to that warehouse in LA because things happen in real time. You don't need a plan for that type of conversation. So I think working with your 3PL, going into that conversation, knowing what your end goal is and painting that picture and working on a program together, we see it happen all the time. Like, these are 3PL owners are some of the coolest people that there are out there. They're entrepreneurs. They got into this business with a lot of risk. So they want to succeed and they really want to wow their customers and build a relationship there. So if you can give them the opportunity by knowing what your expectation and end goal is, you can reverse build almost any type of, you know, outcome that you need based upon that.
So a quick note, I see that Sarah's, I saw a couple of comments come up from Sarah, and I saw a couple of comments come up also from Matt Fain, excuse me, with the visibility. I cannot see the comments on my sidebar. I normally really try to engage. There's normally a lot of really good conversation going on. Due to my technical difficulties this morning, I can only see the comments that are popping up on the screen. So I am not ignoring everyone this morning. I just can't see you. So going back to our conversation about the 3PL capabilities and things like that, it got me to thinking about a client that we worked with, and they worked with a handful. It wasn't a lot, and in their mind, it wasn't a lot. So I was thinking, well, you know, any time savings is likely going to be worth it. So I want to get your perspective on this, because this was my thought. They had their ERP system, which had inventory, and then they had this 3PL login, which had inventory, and this 3PL login that had inventory, and this other 3PL that had inventory that had this other 3PL. And I thought, why don't you just put that all in one place? You know, like there's technology out there. It doesn't have to be Oracle. It doesn't have to be Manhattan. It doesn't have to be that there are so many different technologies out there now, especially in logistics space, that can provide, you know, even if it's just a portal that you log in, there's not anything fancy, but the back end engine, there is some integration API that's bringing everything together. I know Redwood Connect does that. I know Porter Logic sits on top of some systems and brings in different data and, you know, your workflows and things like that. And in my mind, it seemed like low hanging fruit that would really help the logistics team. And we never really sat down to do the business case development because we couldn't really convince the leader of operations to even put it on the roadmap and to have the conversation.
Yeah.
Was I overestimating the savings and the consistency and data and all of, was I overestimating that if you're connecting all of your different 3PL systems in some way?
No, not at all. I mean, I would want the same outcome. I mean, quite frankly, I think the picture you were painting is the ideal scenario, right? And that's why companies, like you had mentioned, Chain IO, things like that are building just API connections between these systems so that they can talk to one another. Give yourself a control tower. We have visibility into all of them. You don't need, like you said, 10 different logins and 10 different dashboards. That's going to be overwhelming and quite confusing to manage. And how do they all impact one another? So having the ability for that to all feed back into one system is going to be uber important at the end of the day. So, I think we're looking at it where, over the next few years, you're going to have that built out that way. I mean, that is why 4PLs exist, right? Is to give you one standardized kind of interface, if you will, for your entire supply chain. What we're finding is you can piecemeal that together quite easily and typically have better outcomes by working directly with the 3PLs, leveraging your in-house WMS, and simply API connecting into each. And having quite frankly, a partner like Pop Capacity that can find the right warehouses where you can achieve this, right? To pick up the phone and call 10 warehouses in each market and ask them if they have those capabilities is a daunting task.
Yes, I definitely agree with that. And some of the smaller brands that we've talked to, the smaller merchants, I see so much that when you don't have that dedicated person, and like you mentioned, it's not just, hey, let's throw this on someone else, because the process should be something that is, owned and managed by someone. And even as a smaller brand, I'm thinking about some of the conversations that I've had with people, and I can hear them, groaning as we're having this conversation of like, who has the time for that? Who has the budget for that? Who has the capacity for that? But no pun intended. Or maybe pun intended. We're in supply chain. But I think that, and I've had this conversation a lot of times with different colleagues, not necessarily customers or prospects, but when you don't know what's out there to help you, it can seem daunting. It can seem like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? To your point, how am I going to call up 10 different partners? We're going into national distribution from regional distribution. We just signed our first big retail, whatever that looks like. And, or we're going to offer this new sales channel. It's going to be D2C. We were previously not shipping to, the West Coast. Now we're going to do national, and we need someone to support that. I've had people call me up and say, oh, like we were doing regional distribution for our frozen yogurt, and now we want to overnight it. Yeah. But, I don't want to take that cost with FedEx. And I'm like, oh, you should call Pop Capacity. Like have them figure out, where these different, because in that case you need cold storage. You have to have, that delivery has to be there 1 day, 2 days at most. But you need them to have dry ice or whatever. I think Matt was telling me that you guys have a partner that has like this gel that keeps things at a certain temperature. So, part of that in evaluating your partner, even that piece of it, I'm thinking from the action items perspective of what we try to do at the show is tell people, hey, this is how to get started. This is what we're talking high level, but this is what you can go do tomorrow. And if I say evaluate partner capabilities, and you're like, dude, that's going to take me a whole RFP in 6 months just to evaluate partner capabilities. But that's because you don't know that Pop Capacity exists. You don't know that there is another partner who is making this better for you. So I say all that to say that I really like having people like you on my show so that everyone knows, life doesn't have to be hard. You know, things can be complex. And I say this all the time, things can be complex, things can be complicated, but it doesn't have to be hard. You don't have to push it, because there are so many really smart people who genuinely are bringing value and impact and offering services to where you don't have to spend your time, because a lot of people will just accept that this is the way of life. This is what I have to do, but you don't. You can call Derek.
Well, that's been one of the most eye-opening things, I think, since we got started with this, right? Because we started a warehouse marketplace. That doesn't really come to mind, like that you're going to know about all these other types of, features and new technologies out there. But what we found was that, called this campfire effect, right? Like folks had come to us for the warehouse capacity. They saw that it was a good frictionless process to get set up with the right 3PL facility. Finally, the first try, didn't have to hop on a plane. I could virtually tour this facility so I could see what they're telling me over the phone. But we're coming to find that like we're agnostic on what other solutions are. So when we do find a good one, we can go through, pressure test it, do our due diligence, and then let our 3PLs and our merchants know about this. I mean, again, it's not a monetary play for us. I'm not invested in these companies that I'm bringing up earlier today. It's that we've truly found that they've risen to the top of each, of what they try to accomplish. And so by adopting just a little node here and a node there, you can really achieve some great things by just knowing what's out there, because it's impossible. You can read all the headlines you want, but we all know most of the headlines go to most of the companies that raise the most VC money in the first place. So what is truly the best technology out there is sometimes hard to come by. So what we've been trying to do is really bake off some of these different things, find out what is best in breed that we would recommend. And we're not doing it publicly. We're just doing it internally, because as our warehouses improve, therefore our commodity improves and our merchants have better successes. So that's the way we're approaching it, is kind of like the way you outlined it. There's just so much out there. How do you cut through it? And what's the best fit? Because the best fit for company A is not necessarily the same thing for company B. That's a unique scenario. So if I was a small brand like the one that you outlined, that our D2C is growing, or this year we just found out, we're doing all of our distribution out of California because that's where we are, but 60% of our orders went to the Southeast. You need to make a change now. So we need to get some forward stock position going. These are the types of problems we solve all the time. What are the main moving SKUs into that region? Let's get those forward, get those placed strategically in a forward place there. Work on the returns process with them in conjunction. And that's where it's going to be key from the gate, out of the gate, that you have the right partner for that. But it's absolutely achievable. We saw last year go from that crazy COVID to this year being more, level set, if you will, because people were more prepared on the 3PL side and the shipper side. So I'm confident that we're getting to a place where this is all improving, because the assumption was that a lot of the consumption, the purchasing online was going to sag this year, and it just doesn't look like that necessarily happened. So if it's here to stay, that's awesome. We've got a lot of solutions that you can put together to make it nice and easy and manageable to achieve these things.
Right. That's great. So before we run out of time, what is our last action item, Nicole? Automate when it makes sense. So we talk a lot about automation. We talk a lot about the promise of digital and software and technology. So I don't remember if it was December or November show. I believe it was December with Nikki, and we talked about automation for manufacturers, and we talked about some different things that you can think about when you're deciding whether or not to automate versus maybe eventually automate, but for now you realize that you didn't really have a process in place. Now you have a process, so let's see if it works manually before you throw it into some system. What do you think about? What are some things that would be low hanging fruit, just off the dome? Obviously, it depends. Is an answer. But if you just had to say low hanging fruit, no one's going to hold you to it. No one's going to call you and sue you because they started here. But where's a good place to start if you're thinking about automating something in your reverse logistics process?
Yeah, I mean, so making sure you have the right partner. If I'm a warehouse owner, I'm wanting to make sure I'm looking at automation now, right? If you're going to be a full fulfillment center with a returns process, let's look at some robotics. I know the capital is intensive to get started with a lot of that, but there are lease options now. High Robotics, one that we recommend oftentimes, there's some ways to get started, start getting some automation going on the stuff going outbound, creating efficiencies and freeing up some of your personnel to now process the returns. And then again, I'm going to stress to really on the automation side, making sure that you are gathering all the information on those returns. What is the amount of time spent per item on that? Which associate was working on that, right? So you can take a look at the end of the week, the end of the month, which associates, where are your outliers, right? Did Johnny take 3 times as long as everybody else? Well, why is that, right? Was this SKU got rejected 10 times more than others? I need to know why. So having a picture of the item and exactly what the damage was is going to be uber important. So in terms of like an actionable item on automation, I think immediately of like getting into the robotics on the front end, getting a system in process for the returns. You can start with an Excel spreadsheet, but I think if you go that route, you're going to be rebuilding that again real soon. Mm-hmm. So, really looking at, like I said, something like 2 boxes or something that's going to give you a visibility dashboard into your returns. It's going to give you that actionable data so you know exactly what the problems are. Because some brands, the problem is consumer abuse, right? Like people buy them, wear them, then send them back. You need to figure out what you're going to do about that, right? You need to come up with a different plan than if you're having integrity issues with your product itself. That's a far different problem. So those are the first 2 things I think of. I think applying some management science inside the building too, right? Taking a look at your workflow, the time per station, pick, pack, sort, and then on the reverse side, where are your inefficiencies? Are you laid out in the most efficient way as possible? Those are things that can be done right now. And if you're a brand and you want to, pressure test your 3PL, make sure you're in the right facility, ask them about some of these things. What are the plans? Where do you see your improvements coming this year, getting ready for next year? Start that conversation and work hand in hand with them related to your product on what's important for you, right? Hey, we had too many returns of this item last year. Can you go ahead and tell me what was the consistent theme that you were seeing? And then you can come up with a great plan for this season.
Okay, so with the point that you made about the robotics and the investment capital and things like that, I do want to make sure that we really drive home because I have this conversation a lot, and I was talking to a colleague who was in procurement at a prefab manufacturer. And they were going to implement all this technology and like really improve the procurement process. And they were going to do all these things. And then the uncertainty of the economy, started to really rear its head. And her department was, let go after they had made all this investment. They were going to do all these things. And they said, well, we're just going to go back to doing things the way we were going to do. We're not going to do the digital. We're not going to do the technology. And, I was telling her it's disappointing to hear that because the digital is there's that promise of digital is a real promise. Yeah. And to be able to, it's no longer really a competitive advantage. Yeah. You know what I mean? You can look at it and see how at some point it's just going to be expected that I can return an item this way. Right. It's just going to be expected that I can do this way as a consumer, but then also as an employee working at this company, and we say it all the time of how digital is also it is a employee retention tool. It is also a way to, combat the labor shortages that we're seeing in supply chain, very specifically in warehousing, very specifically in manufacturing plants and, in construction sites, things like that. Those labor shortages, we're going to be able to mitigate the risks of that with digital and provide people really fun environments to work where they're not walking back. Like you said, how much time does it take to pick and pack? My very first warehouse project was, that your fast movers are like all the way on the other side of your 60,000 square foot warehouse, and people are like walking back and forth literally 200 times a day. You know how much time you're spending doing that. So getting those sort of software and that sort of automation to be able to calculate that quickly, I completely agree with you. So I don't give you time to say any last words. We are at 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. So thank you so much. Our next show is going to be February 10th. Thanks for joining, Derek. Thanks everyone for watching, waking up, sticking around, whatever it is on this Friday. Have a great weekend.